which is sort of an interesting commentary on so many levels. But my wife is actually at work because she's a doctor and she can't not go to work. I'm here with my kids. My daughter was just blending something in the kitchen. I'm not sure what. My son sounds like a crime is being committed upstairs. He's playing video games with his friends. For some reason, they don't go to school at all on Fridays. I'm not quite sure why, but that's just how it is. And like the rest of us, we're just trying to make do as best we can, right? And being an independent consultant and balancing the work and life is never easy. And I think in these times, it's that much harder. Although at the same time, I think we have a little bit of an advantage because we're more used to this than some of these folks who are used to going into the office and having a whole bunch of structure set up for them. So one of the things that I always thought about was I want to help people and I want to grow. And it's not just about the money. Money's nice, obviously, but I also want to do projects that I love working on. I want to work with people that I love working with, and I want to have more impact. And I was always struggling to figure out how to do that without seeming like a used car salesman. I bought a bunch of sales books and I read them and I tried to practice what they told me to do, even though I hated it. And it just wasn't me, and it was a disaster. So I want to talk about the secrets to growing your business without losing your integrity or being a marketing genius or a sales rock star or a huge investment in time and money. And now in addition, we've got to do it without leaving the house. So at the end of this little workshop, I want you to have some actionable techniques that you can do now to help you grow, perhaps even double your business. I'm not saying next week, right? Everything is in a state of great uncertainty and change right now. But I hope that there's going to be some stuff that you can take away and start actually applying next week or maybe even this afternoon. I'll give you some free tools to help you generate positioning, content, web copy, lead magnets, and so on. And also offer tools to help you grow and close your pipeline remotely so that you get to focus on what you do best. And here's the thing that I learned the hard way after many years of thinking sales and marketing just isn't for me. There's actually a lot of stuff that we can be good at as experts, and that includes a surprising amount of sales and marketing, in my opinion. So Liz already introduced me very youthfully. I used to be, probably about the time that picture was taken, I was one of those Birkenstock wearing developers who would roll into the office around noon and stay late at night and never wanted to talk to customers. The first time I went to go visit with a customer, I accidentally threw my rental car keys into the dumpster along with a bunch of fast food wrappers. That whole story makes me cringe now on multiple levels. But I was like, this customer stuff just isn't for me. And then eventually I realized that really the interesting stuff was with the customers, writing the code that we thought was so cool and complicated and all that. Like, yeah, that's interesting, but the hard stuff is actually the people. And then I had my twins and I didn't want to travel anymore. So I tried to figure out what I could do that would let me be home with them, be around with them without, getting on a plane every week and still kind of practice what I did. And I don't know how many of you have read The E-Myth. I read it and I said, yes, this is me, but I don't think I properly absorbed it for quite a while. And if you haven't read it, the basic idea is that somebody's really good at something. And in the book, they use the example of making pies. And so all their friends are like, oh, you're amazing. You should open a bakery. And they get frustrated with their job. And they're like, yeah, I'd love to have a bakery. That would be great. I could be my own boss and I'm great. I love making pies. But then it turns out that running a bakery is completely different than making pies. And the irony for me was I was running a sales and marketing consulting company and I couldn't do sales and marketing. Really bad. I tried anyway. Of course, I read lots of books. I did online ads and outbound sales and I hired salespeople and sponsored things and this and that and the other thing. And nothing really worked very well. And I ended up basically building my business on word of mouth. And I guess it's a good thing we did a good job for people or we would have been in really big trouble. But word of mouth is not necessarily the greatest foundation to build a business on. There were certainly moments of feasting and it felt like there was too much work and I wasn't feeling so good. And then of course there were the times of famine and not enough work. I feel terrible. And I would go on that feast or famine cycle, as most of you are probably familiar with. So one of the myths that I learned far too late is that you're dependent on word of mouth. I had defaulted to word of mouth and used that as an excuse that I was dependent on it, but it's really not the case. And I thought, well, sure, that might be different if you're a marketing genius, but that's really a myth too. And it doesn't hurt if you're a marketing genius, but you don't have to be. And it doesn't hurt if you're a sales rock star, but you don't have to be, right? You can run a great, thriving practice without those things. So the number one thing that I want you to take away from this, the big secret and really the mission of my career after consulting was realizing that I wasn't the only one who struggled with these things. First, I thought it was just me. I was like, I'm just dumb. Why don't I get it? And then I realized there are good reasons that we struggle with these issues, and we're not alone. And in fact, you can be great at sales and marketing without quote unquote selling or marketing. And so I want to ask you, what if you could grow without relying on word of mouth, without giving up your soul, without really selling it all, and knowing what you know now? And I don't want to get too much into math, but just some real simple math so we can kind of keep our heads together around this, because we're not necessarily in the kind of numbers game that you're in if you've got a 1,000-person sales organization, but sooner or later, the numbers don't lie. And so if we think of a referral-driven business, you get X number of referrals, that turns into Y number of leads, and then you have a certain number of conversations with them. Some of those turn into proposals, some of those turn into clients at a certain average price. That's your revenue. And I just picked some round numbers to make the numbers easy, but you could plug in whatever numbers are appropriate for your business. And then if we say, hey, we want to be able to do this online as well, we can kind of switch out referrals for visitors or think of them both together, and the same math applies. And this is where I screwed up big time, because I tried all these things with my website, various revamps and AdWords and webinars and partnerships and so on, and it never did what I wanted it to do. And it's because I didn't really understand that my website only has one job. And if you look at the typical consulting website, and there's a little cartoon, right? Would like to buy some swords, and the guy shouts across the moat, okay, we'll need your first name, last name, title, father's name, business email address, company name, budget, buying timeline, heir's name, and you have to guess the mystery letters, right? It's ridiculous. It's basically hanging a close sign on your business. And this is something that I actually grabbed off someone's website. They literally have the mystery letters on there because they get so many leads. They're worried about having to delete the spam leads, right? We don't want to be closed. We want to be open. And here's an example of some web copy, and it's all fuzzy. That's on purpose, but that's to protect the guilty. And it's kind of coded red, yellow, green. So red is about us. Yellow is we don't know what it's about. It's a little confusing. And green is about the visitor or the prospect. And hopefully you can see this on your screen. There's a lot of red and a lot of yellow and a little bit of green. And I'd love to say that this is an atypical situation, but really it's what I see a lot of. And then we wonder why our websites aren't working, because we make them narcissistic. We make them about us, and we ask for way too much in return for way too little from a visitor. And we know what this is like when we visit a site like this. We get turned off. We don't want to deal with it. But it's very hard to see when it's our own world. I know I've been guilty of all of these things that I'm talking about. So what we want to think about, instead of marketing, let's teach people, right? We're the experts. So if somebody's on a page talking about some problem or discussing some problem that they have, I've got an HR issue because of all this COVID stuff going on. Well, what might they like to know? How would I solve that? Right? Imagine I was putting myself out of a job. What would I tell them to do? Right? If I just met with a friend somewhere, virtually these days, and they needed help, what would I tell them to do, right? Here are the things that I would tell you to do because I'm an expert in this field. And we, of course, want to make sure that they can do this on mobile as well. But the idea is, let's be helpful. Imagine we were being helpful as we would be for a friend. So X tips for your problem if you're on the page, whatever that might be. And it doesn't necessarily have to be X tips. It can be any form of help that you would offer somebody if you were talking to them, except you don't get to talk and have a conversation. You just have to lay it out for them. And the more targeted we can make this, the more effective it's going to be. So for example, if we said it's HR strategies for restaurants who still have a drive-through going on, that's a very different pitch than HR strategies for businesses or small businesses or HR strategies for restaurants, right? The more it can say, oh, that's me, I want that, the more likely they are to want to grab it. And the more likely you are to actually be able to help them, and the more likely they are to want to have a conversation with you. So this notion of, hey, let's give people some helpful content, and then maybe in exchange for their email address, perhaps some other information, we're going to give them even more content. It's known as a lead magnet, and typically it's a PDF. All right, here you go. Here's your list of stuff. Well, That's helpful, but if I'm looking at it on my phone, it's probably a terrible experience. And it's one thing if I've got a 100-person sales team that's making calls all day, every day, or if I'm selling something that I can just sell online. But if I need to actually have a conversation with somebody, giving someone a PDF isn't necessarily the best solution, because we need to call at the right time. We are, in fact, 60 times more likely to make contact with in the first 5 minutes than we are a day later. So you have to feel the need for speed. And the problem is, if we are busy serving clients, what are the odds that we happen to be near a phone and we can call someone at the right time, right? They're not great, hopefully, if we're staying busy. So we basically need more than one swing. Would like a way to know not only did they request something, but if they read it again next week and again over the weekend and again next month and so on, and they read it 10 times, well, this person is a hotter prospect than someone who looked at it once and never came back to look at it again. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, this makes a ton of sense if I had a lot of traffic, but I don't, right? And I don't know about you, but I sort of fell into the self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, I tried all this stuff and I'm feeling really burned and my website doesn't do anything for me anyway. So forget it, it's all word of mouth, screw this. And that was a colossal mistake. But I think it's a fair objection to say, well, if I don't have a lot of traffic now, it's not like I'm suddenly gonna make clients rain out of the sky from my website. And I think that's true. But most of us have another source of business that we don't tap into very well. And I know, at least I was extremely guilty of this. And what about the people that we already know? The folks we've done work for in the past, their colleagues, our friends who know people at various companies that might be helpful. And this is a screenshot of a little calculator. If you go to Mimiran.com and search for social network, you can kind of plug in how many people you can stay in touch with, and based on how many people they know, kind of what is your effective network. But the thing is, you actually have to stay in touch with them to have this network work for you. And as a recovering introvert, this was really hard for me. And one of the most interesting things I found was that I actually really like talking to people, especially now that I can't like go out and like see anyone in person, but I want to do it on my terms. So I went from, I want to do everything possible to avoid picking up the phone. Oh, email is the best thing ever, I don't have to talk to anybody, to I actually really like to talk to people and I can make a ton of calls. I can actually procrastinate by calling people now. It's unbelievable. So the idea is we want to combine our word of mouth and our offline networks with our online network. They're not one or the other, they both complement each other. So for example, the more conversations I have with people, the more I hear about the problems they're discussing, or maybe some of the things that I thought were great problems that they're not really too worried about. And that can feed back into my web copy, can feed back into my lead magnets. And if I have really cool lead magnets, I can then, when I'm talking to people that I already know, I can say, hey, you know what you might want to do before we get too far into a sales conversation? Why don't you go check out this checklist I put together? See how that works for you. Let me know what you think. And these things can start working together in a virtuous cycle. Now, it's great, of course, to get leads and to have conversations, but if we can't close them, it's not worth very much, right? So there's this other myth that you have to be a sales rock star to actually close the business. And I know that this is not true because I basically had to have my clients walk me through selling to them because I didn't know how to do it. And I like to think about, well, what would your doctor do? Right? The doctor's conversation and the sales rep conversation is very different. Most of us don't feel like our doctor is railroading us to do something that pays them the most versus a sales rep. So when we have conversations, think about what would a doctor do? Well, they're going to pre-qualify. They're going to talk to people that are qualified to meet with them based on their specialty, or they'll send them somewhere else. And our lead magnet can help with that, right? We're going to attract the right kind of people that we want to talk to, our ideal clients. We want to have an agenda. What are we going to actually talk about? And then we want to post-qualify. Like, it's okay. In fact, it's really valuable to say, hey, I really enjoyed talking with you. You're not the right fit for me. Let me send you to the rheumatologist. Right? Obviously, that's not necessarily exactly what you would say, but you're like, I know the perfect person for you. And that way you get all these maybes that are really no's out of your mental space. And you don't delude yourself into thinking that you've got more pipeline than you actually do. And then just agree on next steps. And personally, I think scripts are really important. I don't mean sit there and read off the script, hello, do you have 5 minutes to talk about blah, 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 right? That's terrible. But just as a way to make sure that you're comfortable. Think of it almost like a basketball player, right? You're out there on the court, you're running a play, and the play may break down, or you may improvise, you may do something else. It's not going to look exactly the same every single time, but you're not just going out there saying, gosh, I wonder what I should do. And I know for me, when I made the commitment, hey, I'm actually going to start calling people. I'm not going to cold call anybody, but I'm going to call people that I already know. It was really helpful to have a script. And in fact, on my site, there's a place you can grab a bunch of scripts for people who hate selling. And it's all about, how do you open a conversation in a way that isn't necessarily a sales conversation, but doesn't preclude a sales conversation if one is appropriate. So we want to have a real conversation. And here's the cartoon, right? I don't really care about the sword. I just want my kingdom back. We want to understand what the prospect really cares about. Because here's another secret. If we actually have a good conversation and they say, send us a proposal, we've got to make sure that we treat the proposal as a story, not a brochure. And we want to make sure that the hero of the story is not the technology or the tools or the vendor, that's us. We are the old man who is there to help the hero, the customer. And the customer can't get where they need to go without us, but they are the hero of the story. And I see so many proposals that are like those websites that I talked about earlier. If you do the red, yellow, green, it's almost all red, maybe a bunch of yellow and very little green. And I know that when I started out, I started writing proposals the same way because that's what I had seen out there. And you don't have to do it that way. And what else does a great story need? You need a great villain, right? A lot of times we're so happy to have someone who wants to talk to us and seems really interested and is willing to take another meeting and so on, but they don't really have the compelling problem that's going to make them take action. So if you're sitting there scratching your head saying, gosh, I'd love to write this story, but I don't see why, it's usually because there isn't a compelling villain. And it's totally fine to say, hey, I really enjoy talking to you, but the problem you described just doesn't seem that bad. I mean, I see people with much worse than this, and they just kind of work their way through it because they have other priorities. Why are you so intent on fixing this? And then they either say, gosh, you're right, thanks. That would have wasted a whole bunch of time. Let's talk again next quarter after we take these other things off our plate. Or they say, yeah, it might look that way, but, and then they go into the real story, which they hadn't been sharing with you up to that point. And they go, oh, okay, great, I get it. I've even had situations where I'm like, I don't understand. You guys understand this whole problem and exactly what to do. Why are you hiring me? And they said, look, I can't get all my people in the office. They are all over the globe between now and the end of the quarter. And if this isn't ready by the time the board meets the week after the end of the quarter, we're in big trouble. I just need to give it to someone I trust to finish it. I'm like, oh, okay. Up until then, I didn't understand why they were even talking to me. Obviously, that made for a much more compelling proposal than we need to do some work and I'm not sure why they're hiring me. So we want to know what the real story is. We want to know what the symptom is and the stated reasons, and then the real life pain or motivation behind that, right? Like what's really going on. And we want to ask, not just so that we can write a compelling proposal, but because we want to actually fix the right problem, right? We don't want to bust our butts and not solve the real underlying issue. And then if we can really do that, then we can get into value-based pricing and not have to deal with a lot of price objections because we are solving the real issue. So if you look at the math down here, and I apologize, the numbers are kind of small, but basically what this shows is we can make minor improvements across these different parts of our pipeline. So converting more visitors to leads or improving the number of referrals we get by just making more phone calls to people, converting more of those leads to conversations by actually knowing when to call them, having more structured conversations so that slightly more of them turn into proposals, being able to do value-based pricing and even do good, better, best options inside a proposal to increase our average selling price. And without doubling any one part of this equation, we can double our overall revenue. And I think the thing for experts is the conversations and the actual client work. That's where we're good, right? We're not necessarily good at the SEO and the lead generation and the proposal piece. So let's automate as much of that as we can. One thing to keep in mind, right? People hate being sold, but they love to buy. And I don't know, I can certainly think of instances where I felt like I was being sold and I hated it. And I can also think about great experiences I had buying things where I didn't realize I was being sold. They were helping me to buy. So how do we do that? Well, at the beginning, right, we don't market to them, we teach them. We teach them how to do stuff, what to think about. And then when we're actually selling them, don't sell, help. And you might be wondering, this whole webinar is supposed to be about building a reliable pipeline of leads. Why am I spending so much time talking about proposals and sales at the end of the funnel? Because if we can do that confidently and effectively, it makes everything we do upfront at the beginning different. We're not desperate. We're eager to attract the right people. We learn from what we actually close and how we do that, what the right copy should be on our site, how we should reach out to people for conversations, what kinds of referrals we should ask for. It all fits together in a virtuous cycle.
Ruben,
So, yes.
before you go on, somebody's raised their hand, so I want to take them off mute so they can ask their question.
Awesome.
Uh-oh, wait a minute. I think he just lowered his hand. Hold on. Let's make sure I didn't actually like hit the wrong button. Oh, yeah, no, he did. Okay, hold on. Just a second, Dan. Let me find the right button. Okay, Dan.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Great, thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you. The question I had was on the slide, you were covering conversations and so on, where you had all the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're going to cover it later in your presentation, but I'd love to hear if you can expand a little bit more on once you get the lead to prompt the conversation. For example, when is the right time based on their behavior, and how to approach them without scaring them off. I think for me, that's one of the areas that it's somewhat gray.
Yep.
So I'll hear a little bit more about that if you can.
Yeah, and do you mind if I'm going to get to that in a few minutes?
Okay, yes, perfect. I just want to make sure somehow we got to it during the presentation.
Yeah, and if I don't cover it to your satisfaction, make sure you hit me up again. But it's a great question, and hopefully I'm going to cover it for you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan.
you. Thanks for keeping it interactive. It's a little funny just talking into the void here. So here's what I'd like you to think about doing, right? Offer helpful content with lead magnets on your site. Call more people, especially now, right? Minimum 10 to 20 calls a day. And if you're already doing that, that's fantastic. If you've got, depending on how much time you've got, you can do 50. If you had told me that I would do this every day and that I would enjoy it and that I would come out of it feeling good, I would never have believed you. There were times when I forced myself to do it, when I was reading those sales books and all that stuff, and it was so awful. And I would end the day, even when I made myself do it, my neck would be all scrunched up from stress, and I just felt miserable. And it kind of goes back to what Dan was asking about. How can we do this naturally in a way that's nice? And that just makes it so much easier. And then when it's time for a proposal, we want to make the prospect the hero. And of course, as Dan mentioned, we've got to make sure we call at the right time. And I'm going to go into some tips on all of these things in just a minute. But the general idea is, if we think about the number of opportunities we have times our close rate times our average selling price, and we divide that by time, right? That's basically dollars over time. And we can think of that hourly, monthly, quarterly, annually, over a lifetime, et cetera. But if we can practice these things and increase the number of opportunities we have, increase our close rate, increase our average selling price, and automate some of the stuff so that the amount of time we have to put in goes down, mathematically speaking, the math doesn't lie, right? We make more money in less time, and that's what we want to do. And then if we look at this equation, it starts to make sense for us to invest in more things, right? Maybe beyond simply tweaking the parts of the funnel that are directly under our control. Maybe we do some sponsorships of conferences, or we run ads on Google or Facebook or whatever. We take people out to steak dinners, whatever it might be, because the value of those leads becomes much higher. So obviously the steak dinner stuff is not going on right now, but you get the idea, right? The more we can do to make each lead valuable, the more we can invest in them. And I think another myth of this is that this is a luxury that is great if you're a big firm, but it's not available for small firms or solo practitioners. And so I want to talk really briefly about what I built completely accidentally I basically built the CRM that I wished I'd had when I was consulting, and I was trying to use Salesforce. I was trying to use various things that plugged into Outlook. I was using spreadsheets. If it was out there, I probably tried it. And we want to be able to convert more visitors to leads and then to conversations. We want to get folks to clients, right, with e-signature. We want to be able to track referrals. And we want to have more conversations with people who matter. And we want to be able to track all of this in one place. So with your forbearance, I'm going to show you how this works just really quickly. And whether or not you decide, yeah, that's how I want to do things, I think it's going to spur some thoughts about what you can be doing. So are you now seeing a login screen, Liz?
Yes, we are.
Okay, excellent. Let me see. Can never remember my passwords. Good thing I have a password manager. But the idea is, hey, I've got a dashboard, which is pretty lame because it's a demo account, but I should be seeing my impressions and leads over time and my proposals, and then what I need to work on, right? My wins, my referrals, win-loss analysis, any proposals that are expired, proposals that have been viewed but they haven't taken action on yet, ones I've sent that haven't been looked at, drafts and so on, what conversations are overdue today, et cetera, et cetera. So if I hop over here to lead magnets, I can say, let me create a new lead magnet. And there's a bunch of junk in here because it's a demo account, but let's suppose I'm going to start with this 7 HR culture mistakes that will kill your business. And this picture maybe isn't appropriate for this time anymore, so I can take that out, but I can add pictures, I can embed video, I can do kind of the stuff that you would expect to do in a Google document or a Microsoft Word document, that kind of thing, with the addition of being able to actually have video in there. And the idea is, hey, imagine I'm sitting down with you and I'm sharing my expertise. And it could be something as simple as a checklist. You can do more complicated things like an ROI calculator or something more dynamic. And then something that really references, hey, this is a human being, this is a person. I went to a lot of trouble when I was starting out to make it look like I was a big corporation, which was really dumb. And I didn't fool anybody who really cared, and I turned off people who were looking for the anti-big corporation. So if it's just you, let everyone know, hey, it's just me, and here's why that's awesome. And humanize yourself. So, and there's a tool I'll send you guys at the end. There'll be a link to it that lets you kind of play around with some copy for your site and what good topics for lead magnets might be, because that's usually the hardest part for people. It's like they don't understand how brilliant they are because it comes easy. Whatever it is, your genius comes easy to you, and you may not recognize what you need to talk about with other people. But then we need a way to offer this on our site. So I'm going to create a new lead capture widget, and I can change how it looks and what it says. And maybe I want to make it pop up if they've been on the page for a minute or after they scroll 90% of the way down, or an exit intent. And let's stick it in the top right. And then I can control how it looks. And here's the thing that people get weirded out by. The default settings, obviously you have to ask for their email, and I make phone number optional. And that's it. Don't ask for anything else. Now you can ask for more if you really want to. People are so worried that they're going to get bad leads or spam or whatever. I get people from all over the globe downloading my stuff, and a lot of them will never ever be clients and will never talk and all that. And I'm like, that's great. I hope it's useful to them. But the people who want to talk, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised by how many people put a phone number in. And Dan, to circle back to your question, the ideal time to call them is right when they grab the lead magnet. And the secret to calling them nicely is to make the conversation about them instead of you. So if you're like, oh, you just grabbed my HR tips, do you have an HR problem? We help people with HR problems. Then people get irritated, right? It feels like you're being sold. If you call and say, hey, I saw you grabbed that HR lead magnet. What kind of stuff are you going through right now? What have you been doing? How are you feeling? And make it all about them. Again, as if you're sitting down, and they're not a friend, they're a stranger, but you treat them like you treat a friend. People are so happy to talk to you. And I've had great conversations, and some of them turn into customers for me. Some of them don't and never will, but we still had this awesome connection where it wasn't a sales call. It was just a conversation. And so the better job you can do at helping people, where they're going to read through and say, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. This guy's really got it going on. This lady really understands my world. the better the conversation you have and the more natural it will sound, the less it will feel like selling.
Ruben, you just glossed over a really important part. I think for people, sometimes the hard part is like, what am I going to say when I call them, right? So you already talked about the scripts, but you just glossed over a super important, easy thing, right? When you say, hey, I realize you just, I noticed you just downloaded my 6 tips to independent consulting success. Did you have any additional questions about that? And let's jump on a quick call and see, and have a conversation, right? Because you've already got a common interest there, right? You know that they
Right.
wanted this information. And I like the phrase jump on a quick call. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that it's a hook almost, right? Like the entry point to the conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm sorry that I glossed over something that is so important. And what I would say is, this, in fact, when we get over here, there's a response, right? So here's where they're going to get the email that has the link to the thing. And I don't say in here, let's hop on a quick call, right? Because that's salesy.
Yeah.
But what I will do is actually, if they leave their phone number, I will just call them as soon as I'm able. And if I'm lucky, if I'm there in my inbox doing email, I can get them right when they're looking at it. And maybe it's not till later in the day or even the next day or whatever, but by default, call. And I think that's one of those mental switches that was really, really hard for me to make. Call first, and then if I get voicemail, follow up with an email. But it's actually not scary at all because I'm not trying to sell them anything. I just want to hear about their world and their problem.
Got it. Thanks. I'm writing that down.
So you can customize how all this works. And then if you want to drop someone into a MailChimp audience to drip them, you can. And then the idea is you just copy and paste this onto your site where you want this button to appear, and it will handle the rest of the logic for you. So that's great for how do we actually use our website as a lead gen tool. But let's go to our contacts. And we have 12 contacts in here because it's a sample account. But generally, you should have a few hundred, maybe even over 1,000. And think of this as, here are people that I want to talk to. My mailing list might have 5,000 people on it. Don't put them all in here because you can't talk to 5,000 people. You just can't. It's too many. You can't have that many conversations with that many individual people. And you can go to that calculator I referenced earlier to think about, well, how many people can I realistically talk to? But something that's a little different here, you've got your standard, here's the person and the company and the title and when they were created. But these last and next refer to when did I last talk to them and when do I next need to talk to them. And then we've got a set of tags that help me categorize and also help me understand how frequently I should be talking to them. So for example, if I go down here, I've got a bunch of tags and I've also got these untagged, overdue, or due today, and I can go manage tags. You'll notice some of these have a conversation frequency associated with them. And the whole idea here is I was so frustrated using typical CRMs where it would say, you get off a call and then say, call me in 2 weeks or whatever. And I was usually pretty good about setting that next date, but every once in a while I'd forget and boom. If you need to have 3 conversations with somebody and you forget 10% of the time, you've just lost like over a quarter of your business just by forgetting to click a field. And I thought there had to be a better way. I want to be able to say, if I'm dealing with my prospects, for example, maybe I want to talk to them every week. I have X number of those. Here's how many calls I have to make per week to keep that pace up. I had one person who had like 700 contacts and they were supposed to talk to them like every month. And they're like, I have hundreds of overdue conversations. I'm really stressed out. Well, you can't talk to that many people that frequently, but we do want to stay on top, especially of our prospects, our clients, our past clients, and so on. And that's what's setting this conversation frequency. So if I go in here to my prospects, you can see we've got a whole bunch of folks in here. And if I click on start call mode, it's going to take me to the first one I'm supposed to call. And if I click on this, it's actually just going to let me make a call via FaceTime because I'm on Mac and iPhone, depending on your computer, depends on how you set this up. You can also run it directly from your phone. But the idea here is I don't want to think about who to call next. I spent 90% of my time doing that and 10% of my time calling people. I want to get in there. I want to have conversations, right? That's what I'm good at, not figuring out who to call. Let me have the system do that for me. So let's suppose that Eduardo's in the wrong time zone, so I'll skip him. That might be a legitimate reason to skip. Now, if I get in here and I'm actually having a conversation, I like to tag my notes that talk about a problem, need more web leads or whatever, talk about a solution, needs to work with WordPress, decision-making process, need to talk to a partner, etc. And this is sort of a silly example, but over time you might have pages and pages of notes. And I don't know about you, I used to be fairly flippant about that because I thought I had a really good memory. But if you talk to 5 or 10 people a day, and it takes 3 months sometimes between the first conversation and the proposal, I did not like going back and trying to read the scribbles in my notebook. I wanted a way to live search my notes and make sure that I'm discussing exactly the right problem and solution and so on. And you'll notice that now that we've actually entered some notes, the skip button has turned to save, and maybe they say, call me back next Tuesday, so I can override what the tags say. And now it's going to take me to the next one and so on until I'm all set with the conversations that I'm supposed to have. Now I'm all caught up with my prospects, right? And I personally like to devote a little bit of time each week to the prospect calls and then to partner calls, and I kind of break it up. I know other people who are like, I kind of like to mix it up and not do it all the same so they can just go in and look at all their contacts and start call mode. But it just dramatically changes how many people I'm able to have conversations with. And that leads not only to business from them, but so many more referrals than I was getting before. And here's something that I could never understand why this was so hard. But you see here where it says referring contact, right? If you just go in here, you can say, oh, Jake was referred by Susan or whatever. And so then you can actually get a report of who your referrals are and how much business they've sent you. This isn't really all that useful, but hey, we've got an open $5,000 proposal for John Sullivan that was referred by Scott Smith. And so I'm like, why is it so hard to track what we're actually doing if we're a referral-based business, right? So speaking of all that, let's see, who did we just talk to? We just talked to, was it Henry? I think we just talked to Henry. Yeah, so let's create a proposal for Henry. Let's say that it went really well. And we're going to use my proposal template. It's already got his name. This time we'll let them generate a PDF if we want, but we could disable that if we wanted to. And now we're back in our editor like we were in before. But you notice we have these funny looking things like this squiggly line today. That's today's date up until it's accepted. And then it is locked in at the acceptance date, proposal for customer name, right? That some of this stuff is fairly obvious what it is. But if you don't remember, you can click on that merge fields drop down and it'll give you a list of stuff. So now we can go in and pull up our notes. And this is where being able to say, oops, what were the problems they talked about? And I can now copy and paste them into the right place, do a little light editing. Okay, what about the solution? We need to know what they wanted to do, right? And this way, we make sure that when they're reading through it, we want them to be like, yep, 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 yep. I almost think of it as the prospect as the author of the proposal, and we're more the editor. And then let's go in and figure out what we're going to sell them. Maybe we're going to do a little web development for them. I don't know. And we might even say things like, oops, sorry. And we can kind of group things as appropriate, right? Maybe we have a senior person who does some design at the beginning.
Ruben, just to clarify,
yes.
Obviously you're creating this all in the Mimiran tool. Then is it generated as an email or is it a Word document? Because I saw that you clicked on that button that said generate PDF, yes or no. But
right.
What is the initial default here?
Great question. And I'm going to show you that in just a moment, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So I can control how this is displayed, right? And even hide the pricing for people. I can have good, better, best options in the same proposal. And so this is where having this living online, which is where it lives, right? It lives in the server. lets me say, oh, in this case, the client wants these two different things. I can even have them be able to set the quantity of certain things. So, maybe it's a retainer option that, do I have a retainer in here? I do. And if I select that option, oops, if I try to select that option, it will let the client actually determine how much, see why that wouldn't let me select it. There we go. Now the client can actually set the quantity subject to some minimum that I've established.
So that would be useful too. And if it's like a workshop plus additional coaching, then the retainer
Right.
would be like the coaching part, right?
Exactly. And so I can send this to them with whatever they suggested, right? Some people say, send me the whole thing, or they're like, I don't think I want to do the coaching option, but let me know what that would look like, right? And then they have the power to select and deselect and set it up the way they want. They have to select something or they can't accept the proposal. So here we are. We're, again, our bio, I like to have a little pre-recorded video that I put in here. And if I'm good and I have time, I do a custom one for that particular prospect. But if I don't, I just have a standard one that's like, hey, so glad we got together. Would love to help you. Hopefully this proposal covers everything that we talked about. Let me know if you have any questions. And just having, I hate seeing myself on video, but it's more human, right? Especially if we're doing things remotely, the more chances we have to be human, the better. And so now if I go to preview this, right, you can see I don't have a customer name for this person, so that's bad. And this is deliberately glaring, like, hey, something isn't right here. You probably want to go back and make sure that you've got a customer name for Henry Thompson. And this is filled in, and the pricing is filled in, and it's going to say awaiting acceptance by Henry Thompson. And if they actually sign it, which they can do on any device, then it will generate the validity signature and so on. And if we want, we can create a PDF, and that's based on that setting that you talked about. But what we really want to do, some people still want to print off PDFs, but what we want to do is basically we're going to share a link. So we're not going to create a PDF. We're not going to create a Word document. I've done all that, and I am so done with it, because when you do that, you have no idea what the heck's going on, and you're left with, hey, just call them to see if you have any questions on my proposal, which was literally the burning thing that led me to start this whole journey in the first place. Was I hated asking that question and hated leaving those voicemails and wondering if I should leave another one and so on. So in this case, I can just send this link. I can even copy and paste it into my own email, and then it will, the prospect will click on it. They'll be able to see everything. It will put the right information in based on those merge fields, and I'll get notified. Hey, Henry's now reading your proposal. Guess when's a great time to call Henry, right? Now, hopefully, best practice is to set up a meeting to review the proposal and do it live. But a lot of times that will get rescheduled, or a lot of times they'll say, okay, great, appreciate that, but I need to go think about it, I need to discuss with other people, and then you don't hear anything. So knowing, okay, now they're starting to look at it again is super helpful. Liz, did that answer your question about kind of the format that it lives in?
It did. So it lives in Mimiran, and you send a link, and then they read it actually in Mimiran.
Right. Now, if you enable that PDF, they can create a PDF, and you'll get notified. Henry created a PDF. And so now you know that he's done something with it, and you have no idea what he's done afterwards. And so depending on your audience, you can enable or disable that per proposal. I think a lot of people still like to be able to create a PDF of the proposal, but the idea is that we can do this, and a busy executive can pull out their phone. And I used to use the example of they're driving around, they're on their way to the airport, which probably isn't what they're doing right now. But maybe their kids are climbing on them and they're trying to read the proposal on the phone because this is important to them. Let's make it easy for them to do what they need to do. And so the idea here is, let's get more people in our world. Let's follow up with them more systematically, and let's close them as clients when the opportunity is right. And let me be able to see, here's what and this is bad because it's it's a demo account, but hopefully there's a little bit of folks in each category, and let me see where all my proposals are at. Wouldn't that be nice, instead of thinking, gosh, I send a bunch of emails and I'm not really sure what's going on. So that's the real quick high level overview of Mimiran. And if we go back to demo, so as Caroline Valentine said, with Mimiran, I cut the time I needed to create and close proposals by 2/3, which helped me double my business in 2 years. She's awesome. And of course, she did all the hard work to actually double her business. And Mimiran was like the Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? It was the old man that was necessary but not sufficient for her to do that. But there's some free stuff that you can grab on mimiran.com/PICA, and we can send that link to you later. Don't worry about it. But proposal template, lead magnets, positioning generator, and more. And if you just want to get coaching on doing the proposal piece, I've got an online course which has been tremendously helpful for people, and you can use PICA Friend 100 to get $100 off that. There's a money back guarantee. If you've ever stressed out about proposals and you want to not do that anymore, actually have them be fun, check it out. And then if you liked what you saw around the software, you can start a free trial there. And again, Liz is very good about this. She's negotiated another discount, 15% off for life, and free concierge onboarding. So I basically set you up and you get to hit the ground running. There's some work that you have to do, right? We got to get the genius out of your head and into the lead magnets and so on. But the idea is that you don't spend your time futzing with the tool. You spend your time actually growing your business. And then Liz and I thought that if we could get a cohort of folks from PICA together, I'd do a free coaching call for the next 8 weeks. So in addition to the concierge onboarding, let's get together. I mean, Lord knows, even as an introvert, I'm like very happy to just see people and talk to people right now. But that way we could kind of go through things together, like going to a boot camp together instead of just going to the workout at the gym one-on-one. And then also get that proposal course for free. So another great quote from an awesome customer: I'm paying twice what I was paying for HubSpot, but Mimiran is worth it. And keep in mind that he was not paying for like the $800 a month HubSpot marketing platform. He was talking about the like $50 a month HubSpot CRM. But that's the overview, and would love it if you came and wanted to try out the tool. I was just onboarding a customer before we got on this call, and it was great because she was like, oh, great, that's what I've been missing. I don't know how to track all this stuff. But regardless of whether that's a great fit for you, I hope there's been a lot of useful content throughout the conversation about things you can do with your website, things you can do to have effective conversations with people without feeling sleazy, and things that you can do at the end of the sales cycle to craft a really compelling proposal so that you make the rest of your pipeline worthwhile, more worthwhile. And the more you do this, the easier it gets. It's like going to the gym, right? I know as a salesperson, I still hate selling, but I like to make it easy for people to buy. That's kind of how I look at it. And it's like, we all know we should go to the gym, metaphorically these days, not necessarily literally, but it's hard to get off the couch that first day. And it was so hard for me to get off the couch and like pick up the phone and talk to people. And when I tried to do it as a salesperson, it was a disaster. I was awkward. Everyone felt awkward. It wasn't effective. I would have knots in my shoulders by the end of the day. But when I just call and talk to people, it's great. This is what I do, right? This is what we do. We help people with these types of problems. And even if it's not a paying client, we're really happy to have a short conversation with somebody who's kind of in that world and dealing with what we deal with. And if they're not quite in the right world for us to help them, maybe not yet, we can call them later. We can refer them to somebody who might then refer people to us, and so on and so forth. So I want to make sure there's time for questions. Dan, I hope I covered your question, but if anyone's got anything else, I'm here and I'm listening.
Ruben, we do have one question that came in via the Q&A, but I definitely want to talk more about that cohort group. I'm calling it like the pipeline, the PICA pipeline boot camp or something. But because I'm actually one of those people too, where I'm just hesitant to like pick up the phone. So maybe we just call it the pick up the phone boot camp. I don't know, but we'll circle back around that after we get through the Q&A. So the question is, well, actually it's a few questions here from the same person. So were you using this approach as a solopreneur, or did you also have employees? And if you were doing it as a solopreneur, how did you balance spending time on sales versus getting your client work done?
Yeah, great question. Did I stop sharing my screen? Am I just back to me being on video now?
I think you're sharing your whole workspace.
How do I not share that anymore? Because
I
really
don't
need to
know.
see all this. Where is my Zoom window?
I
Zoom
actually,
in?
you know what? I think I might be able to make you stop sharing.
It says I'm viewing your screen. I don't understand this.
There, I took you off screen sharing.
Okay, so now you're just seeing me.
Yep.
All right. I don't know if that's probably not an improvement, but anyway. So I've kind of run the gamut. I had employees. I even hired a salesperson. I had other consultants that were on my team that were nominally responsible for selling, and I've also done a lot of it as a solopreneur. And right now, I am a solopreneur. And I don't think that it's funny because I feel like when you're hiring people and growing a consulting practice, you reach a certain point where you can really specialize and you don't have to be involved in selling everything. And I was never able to get past that point. So even though I had people, it wasn't like it really helped with the whole balancing sales versus delivery question. It just made it more frantic in some ways. But I think what I try to do as a solopreneur, a couple of things. One, I realized eventually that I could usually move a lot faster than my clients. And so rather than making these commitments like, oh, you'll have this tomorrow, you'll have this by the end of the week or whatever, and then busting my butt, being all stressed out, and then being kind of irritated that they weren't like raving about my work, I would say, well, when do you need this by? And it was often like, well, in 3 months, we need it really quickly. But for them, 3 months was really quickly, whereas for me, 72 hours might have been really quickly. So then when I wrote the proposal, I'd say, this will be ready in 3 months. And therefore, I had a whole bunch of time and flexibility to deliver and do the other business development stuff that I wanted to do, or even take clients who said, I need it tomorrow, help, right? So the first thing I did was get out of my own way, right? By not promising things that the client didn't even care about. Next thing is, so much of the automation that I just showed you is built around how can I have a tool do things for me, right? Like get me more leads, tell me when someone's reading a proposal, just make it quicker and easier to put together a proposal. And then being able to call people. Like I would literally say, okay, I know I need to call people. I'm going to block out this afternoon. I'm going to call people. And then I'd sit there and I'd stare, who do I call? And I'd make the call. Oh, it was so stressful. And then I'd just like 5 or 8 calls later, I was a mess. Now I can do that in an hour and I don't even want to stop. And I'm an introvert. So a lot of it is how can we use the technology to make it more efficient for us? And I would say block out time on your calendar, try to protect a certain amount of time every day for calling people. And I don't care if it's 2 calls. I used to tell people, make 1 call on your way to the office and 1 call on the way home, right? If that's all you do in addition to what you're doing now, that's going to be hundreds of calls a year. And of course, that advice doesn't apply to most of us right at this very moment. But even if you think about it, hey, I'm going to make 2 calls, or I'm going to put half an hour in my schedule where I'm going to call people, that adds up. It's like networking, right? Except we have to do it bit by bit and without actually physically networking now, right? You can't go to the first networking meeting and expect leads to raid now. You can't pick up the phone once and expect that that's automatically going to lead to business. And one of the best things for me was realizing the only thing I want to do is connect with this person. But that's the goal of this call. And if they want to buy at some point, I'm open to that. But I'm not calling to sell them anything. Now I can have great conversations with people without getting stressed out about it. And it's easy for me to make those prospecting calls, which are, I probably shouldn't even call them prospecting calls, but that's what they are effectively, right? I'm just stirring things up and having conversations with people.
We could name them networking calls.
Networking, that even has a bad connotation too. I don't know. Okay. It's like connecting calls, right? I just want to have that connection with people. And it doesn't necessarily, like if you're sitting on the bench and you're not doing client work, then spend 4 hours calling people every single day. You'll be amazed at how much fun it is. But if you're doing client work 8 hours a day, try to preserve half an hour to follow up with people. And
Ruben?
Yeah.
Dan, who asked the question earlier, had raised his hand again. So I just took Dan off mute.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The question I had was, you were mentioning, current times. So I'm just curious. Sometimes I have people there that I could call, but right now with things how they are in the marketplace, some people are in a really bad place. I'm sure you've heard all the numbers about unemployment and so on and so forth. how has that impacted your approach in terms of calling people? In the place I'm coming from, and then I'll let you answer, is it might not be a good time to call someone. So I'm just curious how that's impacted your approach.
Very little, and let me tell you why. Because back in the day when I thought I had to make sales calls, it would have been a disaster, right? And I get those calls now. Hey, we've got a COVID special, only $99 for whatever. And I'm like, this is terrible. Like, I can't believe someone's making you read this script. It's awful. But by focusing the conversation on them, right? I'm not trying to call them up to sell them something. I want to know how they're doing, right? So I've been calling my customers, as many as I can get through. How are you doing? What's going on, right? I had one person who's like, I'm not sure I can be in business next month, right? All my clients are canceling work. I can't go. I have to be on site to do this stuff, blah, 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 right? I'm like, okay, what can I do to help? And that's kind of what I think of it as. And then there's other people who are prospects, right? And they know that I know they're a prospect, but I'm not calling and say, hey, you want to buy now? Right? Like, I've got a guy whose business partner is sick, and they rely on sending people to people's homes for their business. And, I've been trying to sign them up as a customer for like a quarter and a half. And they kept saying they were going to do it. They're going to do it. They didn't do it. If I call that guy up and try to close him, it's not going to go well. But the thing is that's nice about that is I don't need like some sales strategy to tell me that. I just know that as a person. But I've left him a couple voicemails like, dude, how are you doing? Hang in there. I don't even talk about what we're trying to sell him, because that's not what is on his mind. And I have other customers who are like, oh my God, or prospects who are like, I used to do all word of mouth. Now I need to do this. Holy crap, get me going now. Right? And that's different because they have said, I need to buy, help me. So I think of it as just like a human thing. I am not a good salesperson. I don't want to be a good salesperson. I want to be a helper, and just call in and talk to people. And if you're there trying to sell them, it's going to be bad. If you're there, I mean, I've had so many people like, how are you doing? What's going on? What's going on with your kids? Yeah, I'm a little stir crazy too, right? And you just have a conversation. And I think, Mark Cuban said that how companies treat their employees is going to define their brand for the next decade through all this. And I think the same thing is like, how are we treating our vendors, our partners, our prospects, our clients? Are we being jerks or not? Everyone's scared. No one knows what's going to happen, but don't use that as a reason to back off and not connect. Use it as a reason to connect. Just do it humanly. Does that help?
And be supportive.
Yeah.
So we have one more question and then we need to wrap up. So the person writes in that the proposal part is a game changer. Would you call 10 to 20 people even if you don't have a downloadable doc on your website?
Especially if you don't have a downloadable doc on your website, you need to be calling people, right? Because you don't have another avenue to generate business. If all you have, and I'm willing to bet you actually have more than 10 to 20 people you should be calling, but by all means, call them. And Liz, I don't know if you have to jump. I'm happy to answer, stay on and answer questions if that's helpful for people, but you may have to shut it down.
No, we're good. Tell you what though, let me just circle back to that one topic about the pipeline bootcamp, right? We said, if we can get 10 people together, we can get over our fear of calling people together. So let me just be clear that we would offer that as free to PICA members, right? If you are interested, send an email to, or you can send it right here in the chat, right? Or the Q&A to me and say, yeah, I'm interested. Or send an email to events@picanetwork.org. And, but it's for PICA members, right? So all I can say is join PICA. We've got your back. It's, any PICA member will tell you, yeah, it's some of the best money I've ever spent. A membership is only $395 for 12 months, which is crazy. It gets you all access pass to everything. So anyway, so that's it for the commercial. And we'll be sending out these notes and everything afterwards, probably later today or tomorrow. It takes me a while to get the video uploaded to YouTube and whatever. And then let's go back to some more questions that came in. So hold on a second. Let me switch over to the Q&A window. And let's see, what have we got? That one we did. Okay. What's a good amount, just a ballpark, of time per prospect call? Like, is it usually 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes? What do you think is a good amount of time for a prospect call?
It's going to vary a lot. And so some of it is, where are they in the sales cycle, if you will? So if you've got a scheduled meeting where they're like, hey, I want to talk about my problems so you can put together a proposal, right? That might be 60 or 90 minutes. If it's just the kind of follow-up call that I was talking about before, I would say anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes is usually about what I would expect, right? And a lot of times you're going to get voicemail, and that's okay. And a lot of times, you get somebody who's like, oh, I just grabbed your thing and I got to run to a meeting. I've got 3 minutes, call me back some other time. That's fine too. And then if you're in the middle of a great conversation, you both have time to continue it, you can always let it run longer. But I wouldn't think about those calls as necessarily being super long. Like, we all kind of have this notion of what a real conversation feels like. And when we're breaking it off before it should be broken off, or if we've let it drag on too long. And so my advice is usually just be human and try to talk to folks for the right amount of time, right? And a lot of times, especially if they're just grabbing something off your site, you call up, they may be excited to talk for 20 minutes because they want to vent about their problem, and then they've got to go run to a meeting. You can always set up, hey, you want to talk about this further next week or whatever, what are some good times?
Great, thank you.
I usually think about, I can probably, depending on how many people pick up, and I know there's a question in here as well about how many people actually pick up and is it rude to call people? I can make I can dial a bunch, right? Click, 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 click. And it depends. Some days everyone picks up and wants to talk, and some days everything goes to voicemail, right? It's just one of those things. And I think that the thing that you can control is blocking out time on your calendar and actually dialing. You can't necessarily control the other stuff, so I try to focus on that.
So what have you found to be the best day and or the best time to call?
The best time to call is when they're reading your stuff, right? That's really the thing that changes everything. The rest of it depends a lot on the person, right? Some people, the best time to reach them is 7 a.m. Sometimes it's 7 p.m. Everyone's got that variation. I would love to tell you that I have this super sophisticated schedule where I do my East Coast calls here and my West Coast calls there and blah, blah, blah. I don't, right? I'm just not there. I just have time in my schedule every day for calling. And to somebody asked about, how do you balance client work? There are days when that doesn't happen. A kid has to go to the doctor's appointment and a client emergency came up and blah, 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 right? But it's there in my calendar. So by default, it's happening every day and it never stops. That was the thing that killed me when I was doing the more traditional consulting approach and feast or famine. I would get so busy. I'd be on a plane, right? And then you get back to your hotel and you're exhausted. Even when I was working from home, I didn't have this approach. It's like the last thing I have energy for right now is to make quote unquote sales calls. And that's everything would dry up, right? It's not rocket science, but it's kind of like going to the gym. I'm not an Olympic athlete, but I try to do a little something every day. Same thing with sales, right? Like, let's just talk to people, and it becomes a habit that doesn't drain you. It actually boosts your energy.
Well, I think that the analogy to going to the gym or running is a good one. Like, it builds up over time till you actually start looking forward to it. Okay, so a comment came in. This assumes that people still use their phones,
right?
And that those who do use their phones will pick up. So culture, at least out here in San Francisco, it really drives a lot of email and texting to make appointments for conversations. Is it not considered rude to call someone now, even if you know they're in the middle of looking at your stuff?
It depends, right? There are definitely people who don't necessarily want to be called. And I'm kind of like, well, why did you put your phone number in here? Right? And most people, and I'm also like, why did you answer the phone? Like, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can I call you back? I'm like, why don't you just let that go to voicemail? But I had that concern tremendously, right? When I started this sort of shift in my own head, because I hate telemarketers calling me. Hate it. And if I behave that way, I think it would go really badly. When I behave as reaching out and connecting with people, I've had so many great conversations, so many people saying, hey, I'm so glad you called. And not everyone. But overall, it's been such a positive experience. Now, depending on your demographic and the people you're calling, that might vary. But my suspicion is people don't have to answer their phone if they don't want to. And I certainly encourage using the technology to schedule conversations. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't want to hide behind the technology and not reach out because I'm waiting for that. So usually if I get someone coming in off my site and I have a chance to call them, I'll call them. And then if I don't get them, I'll send an email saying, hey, just wanted to follow up from that automated response. This is me. Would love to chat. Here's a link to my calendar, kind of thing.
It's the difference between being passive or proactive, right? By you picking up the call, the phone, you're being proactive and you're not just waiting for somebody to fill out your contact me form on your website or whatever.
Yeah, I used to have, PDF downloads on my website, and they were really helpful white papers. I thought I was really being clever, and they had our phone number at the bottom. And, I could look in the Google Analytics and see how many people downloaded them, which wasn't a whole lot, but it was definitely non-zero. And I know to this day exactly how many people called the number at the bottom of those PDFs. Zero, right? Now, every once in a while, I would actually manage to track someone down and call them, and some of that turned into business. Right? So it wasn't like they would never want to work with us. It's just like, how many of us do that? How many PDFs have you looked at the bottom of and said, oh, I'm going to call them right now and try to give them money? It's usually not how we do it.
Yeah, agree. Okay, so here's the last Q&A that we had that came in so far anyway. Aside from website generated leads, how do you recommend reaching out to former clients or contacts during this time when people are really busy and stressed?
Yeah, I think it's a tough balance, especially depending on what you do. But I think my first thought is, how can I be helpful to people? So, I wish I had, like, looking back, I'm like, oh, I should have done all this other stuff with the software that I could have made it easy to do stuff for free and blah, blah, right? But there's only so much that I can do. But I'm like, hey, here's a bunch of call scripts that people can use, because people are always asking me about that. And I keep meaning to do it. Now I'm going to do it. So it's like, hey, here's something that you can use if you'd like, that has nothing to do with my software per se, but it might be helpful to you. Got another person I was talking to recently, a customer of mine who does like natural health stuff. And, a lot of her stuff is about stress and anxiety and so on. And that's in really big demand right now. So if you go, hey, I can sell you a coaching program to reduce your stress, that sounds terrible. But if you're like, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on? Are your parents okay? Your kids okay? And you just have a real conversation. And you're like, by the way, there's this checklist on my site if you're interested, 8 steps to calm anxiety or whatever, right? You're serving them, you're treating them like you would treat a friend. And I think that's really helpful. I think my natural inclination as an introvert is to use any excuse I can to lean back and lean away. And it's like, no, I'm programmed myself enough to know that when I start doing that, I need to flip it around and say, what, despite or perhaps because of the discomfort, let me make sure I'm connecting, because everyone's nervous and stressed and busy and so on.
Ruben, we got another Q&A.
Yep.
Would an email that's been personally typed and meaningful get the job done? Well, actually, let me read this. Would a personally typed and meaningful email get the job done at least 50% as effectively as a call, or mixing it up with calls? So here's a person I feel like doesn't really want to call.
Right. It's a great question. It sounds like exactly the kind of question I would be asking. And the truth is, no, it's all going to vary, right? Like, it depends on who you're calling. It depends on what, yeah, introvert alert. That's right. It depends on the email, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the thing that I would say: start with a call, right? Default to the phone call instead of defaulting to the email. When you get voicemail, which you're going to get a lot of the time, send the personalized email, at least to the really good prospects, right? Like, you may not have time to do that for everybody. So part of what you want to be able to do is kind of figure out who are the ones that I really want to follow up with well, but start with the phone, right? We are not in the kind of business where it's like, okay, we need to run 10,000 people through an email sequence and automatically sell them, X% of them buy something. We are in the business where we need to have conversations with people. So let's, when in doubt, aim towards conversations and use email to facilitate the conversations.
So obviously, Ruben, this has been a terrific, a little bit more than an hour and 15 minutes, actually. We had a lot of people still stay on the webinar, even though we went overtime. Actually, I'd say a majority of people stayed on to listen to the Q&A. So thank you for being gracious with your time. Like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email. And I'm thinking of all the things I've taken away, or I took away a lot, actually, but one of the key things I took away is it's not selling, right? Remember, you've maybe heard this phrase, always be closing, ABC, always be closing, always be closing. I think for us as consultants, it's APV, always provide value. So, so with that, let's sign off, and hope to see you guys soon at another PICA workshop or in the bootcamp cohort for getting over our fear of calling.
Would love to put together a cohort. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I want to participate, so I hope we
All
get
right.
at least 9 other people.
Sweet, let's do it.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good
Have
weekend.
a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.